Ishelle Van de Velde was born on July 21st, 1991, in Terneuzen, the Netherlands. She lived and grew up with her parents in a campsite they owned. She had a younger brother, 2 years her junior. By the time she turned 8, her parents had separated, but Ishelle managed to maintain close relationships with both of them. Life wasn't easy for Ishelle from the start. She was born prematurely and spent several weeks in the hospital connected to life support machines. Her parents were deeply worried and overjoyed when everything turned out fine. When Ishelle was 3 years old, her parents discovered her bright creative side. She loved drawing and got better and better at it as she grew older. This passion eventually inspired her to turn her hobby into a profitable career. She dreamed of becoming a designer. At 18, she enrolled in a fashion school in Amsterdam. Ishelle was always very caring toward her family and friends. However, she didn't like being the center of attention and seemed quite reserved. She was selective about meeting new people. After completing her education in fashion and design in Amsterdam, Ishelle moved to a small town called Usburg, with a population of about 5,000, located near Terneuzen. This allowed her to be closer to her family. Additionally, the town was an ideal place to launch a startup. She opened her sewing workshop there, finding the perfect location in the town center. The success of her business became a significant source of pride for her. Clients quickly started pouring in. At first, they were just regular locals, but soon an entire theater troupe sought her services, and she began sewing costumes for them. No matter the project, Ishelle approached every task with great passion, thoroughly enjoying her work. During this time, she grew even closer to her family. Her grandmother lived along the route to the workshop, so Ishelle would often stop by for a cup of coffee before starting her day. Ishelle became a successful businesswoman who lovingly built her career. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. In the spring of 2020, construction began near Ishelle's workshop. In the neighboring building, another enterprising woman set up shop. This was 44-year-old Sandra, originally from Belgium, who purchased the space and combined it with her apartment. She opened a small store specializing in esoteric goods. The shop offered a variety of ritual items, tarot cards, aromatic candles, and other related accessories. At that time, Sandra was married to a man named Felix, who had 9 children from different relationships. The shop owner met Ishelle when the latter stopped by her store. From that moment, they began to interact closely. The women grew closer, and their relationship blossomed into what Ishelle described as a true friendship. However, her family never shared her warm feelings toward Sandra. From the first meeting, Sandra struck everyone as a restless and somewhat odd woman. But Ishelle dismissed these traits as mere eccentricity and a reflection of Sandra's line of work. Nevertheless, her family's concerns turned out to be valid. By the end of 2020, the relationship between Ishelle and Sandra had deteriorated significantly. Around this time, Ishelle finally confided to her family that she had been having serious disagreements with Sandra for quite a while, though she avoided sharing the details. Her mother and brother assumed that the primary cause of the tension was the COVID-19 lockdown and the subsequent restrictions, which had taken a toll on small businesses. Naturally, entrepreneurs were struggling, especially those whose goods were not considered essential. On the morning of December 15, 2020, 29-year-old Ishelle Van de Velde called her mother, Miranda, while walking to her sewing workshop. They were having an animated discussion about the new strict measures the government had decided to implement. These measures were expected to negatively impact Ishelle's business even further. During the conversation, Miranda heard the sound of the workshop door opening, but then the call was suddenly cut off. Her mother assumed there had been a connection issue or that her daughter had encountered someone and ended the call. Believing Ishelle was busy, she decided not to disturb her. However, that was the last time anyone in the family heard Ishelle's voice. Later that day, they tried to contact her several times, but calls went unanswered. Instead, Ishelle began responding to family and friends via text messages. At first, this seemed unusual and out of character for Ishelle, who loved chatting on the phone, but no one immediately thought much of it. Soon, it became evident that something was wrong. Miranda noticed that the writing style in the messages was completely different from her daughter's usual tone. This raised alarm bells, and she decided to check things herself. She headed to Ishelle's apartment later in the evening when her daughter should have already returned home from the workshop. Upon arriving, she found Ishelle's cat, hungry and alone, something entirely uncharacteristic for her daughter. Ishelle would never have left her beloved pet unfed. She always rushed home from work to take care of her cat. Despite all attempts to contact her, Ishelle remained unreachable. Her belongings, including her documents, were still at home, but her mobile phone was missing. From her daughter's apartment, Miranda called Ishelle's brother, explaining the strange events, the suspicious messages, and the fact that her daughter was nowhere to be found. The worried mother decided to visit her own mother, Ishelle's grandmother, who lived just a 10-minute walk from the workshop. Unfortunately, the grandmother hadn't seen her granddaughter all day either. It was Tuesday, a regular work day, so Miranda decided to go to the workshop, hoping that Ishelle was simply overwhelmed with work and hadn't made it home yet. However, the workshop was completely empty as well. After checking all the usual places, Miranda decided to visit a few of Ishelle's friends who lived nearby. To her surprise, she discovered that Ishelle hadn't called them either. Instead, she had sent them text messages identical to the ones Miranda had received. These messages were strangely impersonal, vague, and lacked any real detail. In the texts, Ishelle claimed that she needed time to herself and wanted to be alone for a while, but she didn't specify where she was going. This behavior was entirely out of character for her. Ishelle had many responsibilities: her business, her family, and her cat. She had never experienced any serious issues in the past and would never just disappear without explanation. Determined to reach her daughter, Miranda sent Ishelle another text message. When she received a response, she immediately tried to call her, hoping to speak directly. The first call connected but was abruptly declined. Subsequent attempts were sent straight to voicemail. This alarming behavior deeply unsettled Miranda. Then, unexpectedly, Miranda received a phone call from a man who introduced himself as Felix. He confessed that Ishelle had been his mistress. This revelation was a complete shock to Miranda. No one in the family had any idea that Ishelle was involved in a relationship with a married man. Felix, Sandra's husband, had always been considered just a friend of Ishelle, but he revealed that they had been in a relationship for several months. What troubled Felix the most was that he, too, had been receiving the same nonsensical and impersonal messages instead of calls, just like everyone else. Realizing that something was wrong, he reached out to Ishelle's mother, hoping to learn more. However, Miranda had no idea where her daughter could be either. When Ishelle's brother arrived at her home, he and Miranda gained access to her social media accounts. Together, they meticulously combed through her messages and recent connections, hoping to uncover any clues. Had she arranged a meeting with someone and disappeared afterward? Was she receiving threats? Unfortunately, a quick scan of her account provided no answers. After spending nearly the entire day searching, the family decided to contact the police. When Miranda and her son arrived at the station, they were told that Ishelle was an adult with the right to go anywhere she pleased without informing anyone. The officers saw no reason to begin a search. There were no indications of foul play, no signs of a break-in or struggle at her home or workshop. She hadn't been reported as being stalked, and no one had witnessed anything suspicious. However, Ishelle's brother insisted that the text messages were not written by her. He was convinced that someone else was using her phone. The lack of calls and her abrupt silence pointed to something deeply concerning. Despite their pleas, the police remained firm in their stance. Determined to find her themselves, Ishelle's family began their own search. They drove around the city, checked all the places where she might have gone, handed out flyers, and questioned local residents, hoping for any information about her whereabouts. But their efforts yielded no results. Once again, Ishelle's family returned to the police station and reiterated the strange circumstances surrounding her disappearance. This time, they emphasized that her phone was likely being used by someone else, possibly someone involved in her disappearance. It seemed the officers were finally convinced to act, but only in words. In reality, they remained inactive, still believing Ishelle would return on her own. On January 1st, 2021, Ishelle Van de Velde's family turned to social media for help. They began involving everyone they could in the investigation. This included Sandra, whose business was located near Ishelle's workshop. Sandra actively participated in many search efforts and frequently posted updates about Ishelle's disappearance on social media, hoping to reach potential witnesses. Initially, Ishelle's relatives had no idea how the conflict between the two women had ended. Sandra herself refrained from giving any detailed comments. She was particularly irritated by the topic of her husband Felix's alleged infidelity. Felix, on his part, was also deeply distressed. He reached out to Ishelle's family and disclosed the existence of a love triangle. This revelation sparked great interest among the relatives. They hoped this information would attract more attention from the police. Ishelle's brother and mother visited Sandra's store to talk to her. Sandra claimed she had no idea what had happened to Ishelle or where she was. The missing woman's family managed to get permission to search the store. They walked through the premises, trying to spot anything that Ishelle might have used or that might have gone missing with her. Naturally, their main interest was in finding her phone. On one of the shelves, the brother found a device resembling Ishelle's phone, but no one could confirm with certainty whether it was hers. The SIM card had clearly been replaced, as calls to the number didn't go through. Sandra noticed their interest in the phone and quickly threw them out of the store. This behavior seemed suspicious, as if Sandra was hiding something. The mother and brother reported this to the police. This information caught the attention of the detectives. The police intensified their investigation, enlisting specialists with specially trained dogs. The dogs searched Ishelle's workshop, but immediately showed interest in Sandra's esoteric goods store, heading straight there. From there, the dogs were drawn to the waterfront. Ishelle's relatives knew she often walked in this area, and the animals were particularly attracted to the water. It was decided to take a boat equipped with specialized equipment to scan the bottom of the water and continue the search. The operation lasted all day, but even by evening, nothing was found. However, the dogs frequently jumped into the water and actively searched, reinforcing the suspicion that something important might be submerged. Divers were brought in the next day to comb the bottom thoroughly. In the end, the divers concluded that the body of water was very shallow and contained nothing suspicious. The dogs might have been reacting to residual scents, but if there had been anything there, it was likely moved further down the canal. Hiding the body of a woman nearly 180 centimeters tall in such a shallow area would have been impossible. Once the police were convinced that nothing was there, they expanded the search area. Unexpectedly, a police officer visited the Van de Velde family and informed them that Ishelle had been found. She had been detained at a rave party and subsequently jailed. Allegedly, she had overindulged and behaved aggressively. Ishelle's family found it hard to believe that the 29-year-old woman would act that way, but felt they needed to verify the information. For a moment, hope flickered that she was alive. Even if she had gotten into some trouble, it seemed trivial compared to the alternative. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. The woman the police had detained was not Ishelle. After this mishap, the authorities informed the family that they were no longer allowed to conduct their own investigation, as the police had now decided to fully commit to the search. Ishelle Van de Velde was officially declared missing. By Tuesday, February 9th, 2021, Ishelle had been missing for nearly 2 months. Authorities began a thorough investigation of her workshop and decided to expand the search. The Van de Velde family's suspicions about Sandra were also taken into account. Sandra became the prime suspect due to her strange behavior and apparent motive. The police planned to search Sandra's store and home. By the end of the day, Sandra was brought in for questioning. Detectives spoke with her for a long time and quickly found inconsistencies in her statements. Sandra admitted that she last saw Ishelle on December 14th, the day before her disappearance, and claimed that Ishelle did not visit her store on the 15th. However, when Sandra's phone was examined, investigators discovered a video recorded on December 15th. The video showed a hand holding and unlocking Ishelle's phone, clearly indicating that Sandra was lying. Additionally, investigators suspected the video was not random. It seemed Sandra had secretly recorded it to learn the screen unlock code for her rival's smartphone. This indirectly indicated that Sandra had access to Ishel's phone and was the one sending the suspicious messages to Ishel's friends and family. The suspect's lies prompted the police to take more decisive action. Sandra was arrested. Forensic specialists conducted a more thorough search of Sandra's store and quickly discovered a large blood stain on her rug. The shop was connected to the apartment where she lived. The entire space was searched, revealing more suspicious stains, especially in the bathroom. During the search, the police also found the phone that had caught Ishchel's brother's attention earlier. It undoubtedly belonged to the missing woman. The most devastating news for the Van de Velde family came when the status of the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide investigation. The large amount of blood found in Sandra's home and store was later confirmed to belong to Ishelle, providing substantial grounds to assume she was no longer alive. Meanwhile, interrogations of Sandra continued. Detectives tried to determine what had happened to Ishelle. However, despite the mounting evidence, Sandra refused to confess. Investigators returned to her store to conduct further searches and interviewed her neighbors. The longer the investigation went on, the more evidence they gathered against Sandra, although much of it was circumstantial. She was considered the prime suspect in Ishchel's death. When the situation became undeniable, Sandra began to shift the blame onto her husband, Felix. Law enforcement questioned Felix, who quickly proved he was not involved. However, Felix himself had serious suspicions about his wife. He recalled that a few weeks before her arrest, their 13-year-old son had helped Sandra carry a very heavy bag wrapped in multiple layers of garbage bags. The bag had a strong and unpleasant odor. The detectives believed that the bag might have contained Ishchel's remains, but the body still needed to be found. The authorities doubled their efforts, and the search continued until February 16th. Finally, the Van de Velde family was informed that fragments of a woman's body had been discovered. Several parts were found in the canal and were taken to a forensic lab for analysis. It was quickly determined that the remains most likely belonged to Ishelle. However, to achieve 100% identification, more fragments would be required. Sandra was considered a murderer, but there were reasonable doubts that such a petite woman could have done anything to the taller and larger Ishelle. The thing is, the main character of the story was about 180 centimeters tall and weighed about 80 kilograms. Her friend Sandra was 155 centimeters tall and weighed no more than 50 kilograms. She was slim and fragile, and it was hard to understand how she could have dealt with someone of a larger build. However, the police insisted that Sandra was the perpetrator. Now the detectives decided to obtain the GPS data of the main suspect's car. This helped prove that she had visited the canal to dispose of body parts. The timing matched with Felix's statement about carrying a suspiciously heavy, foul-smelling package. They also spoke with the 13-year-old son of the likely murderer, who confirmed his father's words about the very heavy, badly smelling package wrapped in several layers of black plastic. Suspicions about Sandra only grew stronger. Body parts of the victim were found in the canal between two cities. They were located at a lock source near the border with Belgium. Unfortunately, the police only found several body fragments, and now they had to find the rest for a complete examination. The cause of the girl's death remained unclear. Dogs were once again used for the search. It was obvious that other parts of the body had to be in the canal. When the dogs arrived, they jumped into the water almost every minute. The smell of decomposing flesh was overwhelming, and it helped. In the following days, all the parts of Ishelle Van de Velde's body were recovered. Now, the family was waiting for the examination of the remains, after which they hoped to receive the body for burial. For the relatives, all these events became a true nightmare. Iskel's brother even suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He had to undergo rehabilitation in a clinic for 9 months. All of this happened during the lockdown and while waiting for hearings, which only worsened the situation. As was later revealed from the clear evidence, after Ishelle Van de Velde's death, her body remained in Sandra's store for a while before Sandra decided to dispose of it. Apparently, she dismembered the body in her apartment while it was empty. The main suspect initially refused to admit her guilt. She gave confused and disjointed testimonies, which she later changed several times. At the early stages, the detectives followed this version. According to Sandra, early in the morning on the day of Ishelle's disappearance, December 15th, Ishelle came to work again. She immediately approached her neighbor to resolve a disagreement between them regarding a man, Felix. Sandra insisted that Ishelle wanted to destroy her family, behaved aggressively, and everything got out of control. The women started fighting. Ishelle accidentally fell and hit her head on the kitchen radiator. After that, Sandra simply got scared and decided to hide the body. She feared trouble, so later she dismembered the deceased and took the remains out of town. However, the investigators did not believe this story. In their opinion, there could be no accident here. Everything pointed to a carefully planned murder fueled by jealousy. Specifically, Sandra must have known the access code to her rival's mobile phone in advance to later use it for sending false messages. She even filmed a video for this purpose. This was clearly done before the attack, as confirmed by her video recording. Later, several neighbors came forward, saying they had heard suspicious noises and sounds resembling female moans coming from Sandra's store. Now they understood that they had probably heard the last moments of Ishell's life. It took a long time before preparations for the trial were completed and hearings began. They were postponed until November 2022. The trial lasted 2 full days. Sandra generally either answered questions hesitantly, remained silent, or claimed she didn't know anything. Her statements during the investigation and while awaiting the hearings changed 3 times. Moreover, she told fundamentally different stories. Finally, she made a new confession, saying that she wanted to tell the truth. Sandra admitted that it was indeed her who killed Ishelle, but by accident, just as the law enforcement officers had suspected. The cause of the dispute was her relationship with Felix. Her relatives knew that she had been in love, and this had been long before the death. But they hadn't suspected that it was a romance with a married man and what it would lead to. Ishelle had been quite secretive, not revealing the details of the relationship. She was clearly upset and saw it as a problem, but she wanted to handle everything on her own. Sandra explained that they immediately found common ground with her neighbor, and she had allowed Ishelle into her personal life quite closely. In turn, Ishelle had also become close to Sandra's husband, Felix. Gradually, they realized that they loved each other. Later, Sandra found out about this and was beside herself with rage. She demanded that the affair be stopped. On that fateful day, December 15th, Ishelle decided to have another conversation about the affair with Felix. The conversation did not go calmly. She pushed Sandra. A conflict ensued. The woman fell, enraged. She quickly got up and shoved her attacker, who fell, hit her head, and cracked it against the corner of the radiator. The first part of the story about the conversation seemed quite plausible, but Sandra ended her confession by stating that it had all been an accident. Of course, no one believed her. It was believed that she had used some blunt object to deliberately strike Ishelle in the head from behind. In any case, her words were being contradicted because she had already changed her story for the 4th time. There was no trust left in the woman. The lawyer tried to emphasize that Sandra couldn't have physically dealt with a larger Ishelle. The absence of the murder weapon made it difficult to argue these claims. At the trial, a witness testified who had visited the deceased's workshop on December 15th. To her surprise, Sandra, not Ishelle, came out. She handed over an item the client had wanted to pick up. The customer unexpectedly heard a groaning sound coming from the fitting room. It seemed odd. Sandra apologized, left for a few minutes, and when she returned, there was no more noise. But even more strange was a statement Sandra made to the stranger. She allegedly mentioned that she was considering going to prison because she might have caused harm to someone. At the time, the comment seemed out of place and odd, so the visitor simply didn't pay attention to it and left. One of the most convincing pieces of evidence for the prosecution was the video of Sandra's hand and Ishelle. Sandra had secretly filmed it to obtain the access code to the mobile phone. The prosecution believed the murder was premeditated. There were grounds to suspect that the victim had been held hostage for quite some time before she was killed. Traces of binding were found on her body. Experts believed she might have been tied to a chair. The condition of the remains did not allow for a full assessment of the torture the girl had endured. There were clear signs of strangulation, believed to be the method Sandra used to kill the victim. After the blow to the head, Ishelle was still alive. 46-year-old Sandra was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to only 18 years in prison. In addition to her prison term, Sandra was ordered to pay 200,000 euros as compensation to Iskel's family. The defendant immediately stated that she disagreed with the verdict and planned to appeal to the Supreme Court. This news came as a blow to the victim's relatives. It was possible they would have to face the killer again in court. Ishelle's brother decided to honor those who helped find his sister's body. He adopted a search dog and plans to train it to save lives. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support the video with a like, and let's discuss the story in the comments. Thank you, and goodbye.